My name is Hallie Mercer. I am 36 years old, and 9 days before the Blue Ridge Makers Market, I found a wall cutting my reserved pavilion in two. My mother's plan put Brooke's brand in front and my studio behind it. Then she handed me labels and a list of pottery I was expected to supply, with instructions to cover every maker mark. She expected me to stock the booth, let Brooke lead the buyer meeting arranged through my portfolio, and call it family support. What she did not expect was for me to place my brass sign between her and that buyer, while Brooke finally told the truth. The sign was not large. It was a narrow strip of brushed brass with Hallie Mercer Studio stamped by hand across the front. I paid a metalworker in Asheville. He made it after my first profitable year. Every shallow dent showed where his hammer had landed. My mother had taken it from my studio, then covered its place at the pavilion with cream vinyl that said Brooke Mercer Home. That was the moment the problem became simple. They did not want my help. They wanted my work without my name. Before I tell you how that opening morning ended, tell me this. How much of your own work would you surrender before helping family became helping them erase you? I grew up 20 minutes outside Asheville in a cedar-sided house, where the kitchen table served as a command center. My mother, Linda, ran every school fundraiser, church auction, neighborhood cleanup, and holiday drive that anyone was foolish enough to mention near her. My father, Raymond, built display walls. He repaired folding tables for all of them. Brooke and I learned early that family projects were not invitations. They were assignments. Brooke was 3 years younger than me. She could make any assignment look like a party. She could enter a room with one roll of ribbon. Soon, 6 people would be tying bows for her. I counted the chairs and checked the extension cords. I stayed after everyone left to sweep. My mother called Brooke creative. She called me dependable. It took me years to understand those words. They were not equal compliments in our house. Creative meant Brooke was allowed to begin things. Dependable meant I was expected to finish them. When I was 15, Brooke sold painted flower pots. It was at the spring church fair. She painted 4. I sealed 20 more because the paint ran in the rain. On the morning of the fair, Mom put Brooke behind the table in a yellow apron and sent me to carry boxes from the car. Brooke made $90. Mom bought her a charm bracelet to celebrate her first business. I got thanked for being such a good sister. That was not a tragedy. It was a pattern. Patterns are quiet when you are standing inside them. My father noticed more than he admitted. He would sometimes hand me a cold soda while we loaded the truck and say, "Your mother leans on you because she trusts you." For a long time, I accepted that as love. I found clay at 19. I was taking general classes at the community college because I could not afford to guess wrong about a 4-year degree. A friend needed someone to fill an empty seat in an evening ceramics course, and I went because the studio fee was already paid. The first bowl I made leaned hard to the left. The rim dipped in one place. The glaze came out the color of weak tea. It was objectively bad. I loved it. Clay did not care whether I was creative or dependable. It required both. You could imagine any shape you wanted, but then you had to center the weight, pull the walls evenly, dry it slowly, fire it at the right temperature, and accept that heat would expose every shortcut. I changed my schedule the next morning. By 22, I was working weekdays at a hotel front desk and spending evenings in a shared studio near the river. By 25, I had saved enough for a used wheel. I kept it in the corner of my rental garage, beside a water heater that rattled whenever I pressed the pedal. I sold at my first Blue Ridge Makers Market when I was 27. The market filled an old train depot. It also filled the surrounding streets each fall. Woodworkers and printmakers applied months ahead. So did jewelers, bakers, and textile artists. Thousands of people came through if the weather held. My parents had joined the organizing committee years earlier. Mom handled vendor relations. Dad supervised setup. They did not get me accepted. Mom warned me not to apply too early. She said I might embarrass myself. I applied anyway. My first space was narrow and outdoors. It sat beside a downspout. Rain blew under my canopy before noon. I spent half the day wiping water from my shelves and the other half holding one tent leg with my foot. I sold almost everything. A restaurant owner bought 12 shallow bowls. A woman from Charlotte ordered a dinner set for her anniversary, and 3 customers returned the next year to ask for me by name. Mom remembered the rain. I remembered the customers. The next winter, I registered Hallie Mercer Studio as a business. I rented half of a converted repair shop with another potter and bought my first new kiln on a payment plan. I chose a simple maker mark, my initials inside a small open circle, and pressed it into the bottom of every piece while the clay was still soft. The mark mattered to me. It did not say I was famous. It said I was responsible for what I made. 8 years passed. I built the business one repeat customer at a time. I made quiet tableware in soft blue, gray, and cream. My bowls were not flashy. They sat well in your hands. The handles on my mugs fit 3 fingers without squeezing. The plates had a slight raised edge. It kept sauce from running onto the table. That was why the brass sign meant so much. I ordered it after a holiday season when I finally paid myself every month without touching savings. The metalworker, a broad man named Owen, asked whether I wanted the lettering printed by machine. I told him no. He stamped each letter by hand. When I picked it up, he apologized. The second E in Mercer sat a fraction low. I ran my thumb over it and said, "Leave it." That tiny, uneven letter looked like proof of a human hand. So did my pottery. The sign hung above my market table for 5 seasons. It appeared in customer photos and local magazine features. It also appeared on the front page of my website. People who forgot my name remembered the brass. Brooke never showed much interest in the work itself. She liked the photographs. She moved through jobs the way some people moved furniture, always believing the next arrangement would fix the room. She worked at a salon and a real estate office. Later came a boutique and a wedding planning company. She was good with customers and terrible with repetition, but once the exciting part ended, she looked for another beginning. What I did not envy was the way Mom converted every abandoned plan into evidence that Brooke had not been properly supported. By the time I was 35, the studio was steady but not easy. I had 2 part-time assistants during busy months. I sold through my website and 3 regional shops. I also worked seasonal markets. I was paying off a larger kiln and saving toward a small showroom. The Blue Ridge Market remained my biggest weekend of the year. The premium corner pavilion sat by the depot fountain. It was the best space on the map. It had 2 open sides and overhead lighting. It held a full table setting. Vendors renewed it early because nobody wanted to give it up. The woman who held it for 7 years retired from weaving. I applied the same morning the opening was announced. The market committee accepted my application in January, and I paid the full pavilion fee for the corner space marked Hallie Mercer Studio. My mother sent the confirmation. Vendor relations still ran through her email. Her message said, "Congratulations. You finally got your fancy corner." I printed the map and taped it above my packing bench. For 9 months, I designed the collection. Every choice was made for that pavilion. I built low oak risers to fit the tables. I made a wall of small hanging plates for the back panel and ordered warm gray linen runners that matched my new glaze. I called the collection Blue Ridge Supper. It was the most coherent work I had ever made. The opportunity became bigger in June. Harbor Home was a regional home retailer. It announced that one of its buyers would attend the market. The company sold work from small American studios. Its collections were limited and seasonal. They were not a giant chain. Still, an order from them could keep a workshop busy for months. The buyer's name was Lena Price. The market asked interested vendors to submit a short portfolio. so I sent photographs of blue dinner plates and cream pitchers. I also sent the nesting bowls. I also sent the corner pavilion layout. I also included realistic production limits. I could handle a modest wholesale order. I would not turn handmade work into a factory line. In August, Lena emailed me directly. She said the restraint of the collection stood out. She wanted to visit my pavilion on opening morning. She also wanted to discuss a possible holiday test order. When I called Mom, she went silent for a beat. Then she said, "Harbor home." Brooke used to sell their linens at the boutique. Her second sentence was, "This could be good for both of you." I should have paid closer attention to both sentences. Brooke announced her new business 2 weeks later. She invited the family to brunch at my parents' house and placed a mood board on the kitchen table. It showed folded linen napkins, candles in amber jars, pale wood serving boards, and ceramic bowls that looked very much like mine. Across the top, in a thin serif font, she had written Brooke Mercer Home. Brooke said she wanted to create a collection for women who loved handmade things but did not know how to put a room together. She would curate objects from local makers. Then she would style them and sell the story of a beautiful table. Mom touched one of the photographs. It was a close crop of blue bowls on a linen runner. I recognized the image. I had taken it in my studio for my spring catalog. "That is my photograph," I said. Brooke leaned closer. "I used it as inspiration. The actual site will be original. You downloaded it from my site. It is a mood board, Hallie." Mom gave me the look she used when a guest complained about seating. "Nobody is selling your photograph." Brooke moved on to her launch plan. She wanted to introduce the brand at the Blue Ridge Makers Market. She had missed the regular application deadline, but Mom believed the committee could add a small feature table near mine. I said I was not comfortable combining our businesses. Brooke's smile tightened. "I did not ask to combine them. You are using my work to show what your brand will look like. I am showing a style." Mom stepped in before Brooke had to answer. She said a shared area would help both of us. Customers buying dishes might want candles and linens. Customers drawn to Brooke's styling might discover my pottery. I reminded her that Lena Price was evaluating my studio. She was not coming for a family collection. Mom said, "Do you hear yourself?" That question carried years of training. It meant I had become too protective, too serious, too difficult. The family had reached a conclusion. My resistance was now the problem. I said no again. The brunch ended 20 minutes later. Brooke packed her samples into a wicker basket. Mom cleared plates with sharp movements. Dad walked me to my car. He said, "Your sister needs a win." I put my keys on the roof instead of opening the door. "Why does her win need my booth?" "It does not have to be your booth." "Then tell Mom that." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You know how she gets when she can see the whole plan." That was Dad's favorite description of Mom's pressure. A plan. If she had arranged the pieces in her head, everyone else was expected to stand where she put them. I told him I would not share the pavilion. He nodded. His face said he was carrying my answer back as bad news. I worked. The studio smelled of damp clay and coffee. My assistant Tessa helped me sand the feet of dinner plates. She also wrapped finished pieces in brown paper. Tessa was not the gallery owner or a business partner. She was a printmaker with careful hands. She worked for me 3 mornings a week while building her own shop. A week later, Brooke came to the studio alone. She brought pastries and an apology that almost sounded complete. She admitted the mood board photograph had been careless. She said she was nervous about launching. She had grabbed images that matched what she wanted. She promised not to put anything online without permission. Then she asked to borrow 6 pieces for a photo shoot. That was my mistake. I knew what it felt like to be reduced to one family role. I also knew Brooke had talent. She could style a plain shelf so people wanted everything on it. Her problem was not a lack of ability. It was that Mom protected her from the boring middle, where ability becomes work. I agreed to lend her 2 mugs, 2 bowls, 1 pitcher, and 1 vase. I wrote the 6 pieces on a studio loan sheet and asked her to sign it. That was normal practice. Galleries signed the same form when they borrowed work for photographs. Brooke laughed at the form but signed. The return date was the following Friday. I told her she could credit the pieces. The credit had to read Hallie Mercer Studio, nothing else. She hugged me and said, "This is why I wanted you involved." I corrected her, "I am not involved, I am lending you samples." "Right, samples." She carried them out in a padded crate from my packing shelf. The photographs appeared online 3 days later. At first, they looked tasteful. Brooke had rented a bright kitchen. She arranged the 6 pieces with linen napkins, candles, pears, and bread. The caption named my studio. It called the collection a preview of local partnerships. That small approval became important later. It was the sentence my mother kept using to claim I supported the whole launch. On the Friday the pieces were due back, Brooke asked for 1 more week because a local magazine wanted another setup, and I agreed in writing with a new return date. The following week, my mother visited the studio with lunch. The larger kiln was running. Shelves of blue dinnerware lined the wall. My brass sign rested on a padded bench because Dad had offered to polish it before the market. Mom picked it up. "You still use this old thing? Customers know it. It looks homemade. It is handmade." She set it down. "That is not always a selling point." Her mouth went flat. "You are making one weekend carry too much weight. It is my largest market. You have had 8 of them." There it was, the family arithmetic. If I had received something before, Brooke was now owed a turn. I explained that the buyer meeting was tied to my portfolio and production plan, while sharing with a new retail brand would confuse customers and look less professional. Mom said Brooke could handle the presentation. I asked what presentation. She glanced toward the office door. "The visual side, you do not enjoy selling yourself." "I sell my work for a living." "You explain bowls. Brooke creates an experience." The words hurt because they contained a small truth. I was better at making than performing. At markets, I sometimes talked too long about firing temperatures when a customer only wanted to know whether a mug could go in the dishwasher. But a weakness is not permission to replace someone. Before leaving, she took my brass sign from the bench. I stopped her at the door. "Where are you going with that?" "Your father offered to clean it. I can bring it to him." "Hallie, I am already going home." I let her take it. That was my second mistake. The sign belonged to me. My parents had handled market setup for years. Dad had repaired the hanging loops twice. Letting Mom carry it felt ordinary. Nothing about the next month felt ordinary. Brooke's website went live on a Monday morning. Tessa found it before I did. On the home page, Brooke stood at the rented kitchen table with one hand resting on my pitcher. Behind her, my 6 pieces filled the frame. The caption did not mention my studio. It said, "The first Brooke Mercer home table collection brings together original forms, natural textures, and modern mountain color." My bowls appeared in 9 photographs. My vase appeared in 4. A close image showed my open circle initials beneath the pitcher. The caption called it the Brooke pitcher. Below the images was a paragraph about Brooke growing up around makers and developing a lifelong belief that useful objects should carry the warmth of the hands behind them. That sentence was adapted from my artist statement. I called Mom. She answered from a market meeting. I told her to remove my work and language from the site. I told her the page named my pitcher after Brooke. There was no design family. The page still claimed original forms under Brooke's brand. I told her the page needed to come down until the wording was accurate. Mom said taking it down would hurt the launch. She asked why I was willing to embarrass Brooke over photographs I had already approved. I said I had approved 1 credited social post, not a retail page. Then she used a softer voice. "Can we get through the market first?" "No," Mom said. "Think before you turn this into something permanent." The call ended. I sent Brooke a written notice that the loan was over and asked her to return all 6 pieces by the next afternoon. I included the original credited post. I also included screenshots of the new website. I kept the language plain. She said Mom's web volunteer had reused the wrong copy. She promised to fix the credit. She also promised to return the pieces after one final press photograph. I told her no more photographs. By evening, my artist's statement had been rewritten again. The direct phrases were gone, but the product names remained, and my credit appeared in small gray type at the bottom of the page. The line read, "Ceramic Production Support by Hallie Mercer Studio." I made the forms, I mixed the glaze, I fired the pieces. Brooke had arranged pairs around them. I sent a formal request. It asked them to remove the product names and photographs. I copied the market committee's general address because Brooke's launch was tied to the event. My mother controlled that inbox. The next morning, she replied from the committee account. The reply said, "Thank you for your concern. Vendor branding questions will be reviewed after this year's market." It was signed, Blue Ridge Makers Market Vendor Team. My own mother had answered me as an institution. Until then, I had believed this was family pressure around a booth. The email showed me something else. Mom was willing to use her market role to make my objection disappear. I forwarded the full exchange to the committee treasurer, a woodworker named Calvin Reed, and asked whether the response reflected a committee decision. Calvin wrote back that he had not seen my complaint. He said Brooke was not on the approved vendor roster. He had reviewed that roster himself. I read that line twice. The public map still showed my studio in the corner. When I called Dad, he admitted he was at the depot measuring panels. I drove to the depot. The corner pavilion had been divided. A new center wall created a large front area and a narrow space behind it. My oak risers were stacked in the rear. The front tables were covered in cream cloth. A paper layout hung on the wall. It labeled the main section Brooke Mercer Home. My studio name appeared in smaller letters behind the partition. I asked, "When were you planning to tell me?" I pointed to the screws in the new wall. "That is a very committed draft." He tried to explain the logic. Brooke needed visibility because she was new. I already had a customer base. My work would provide the handmade center of the collection. The buyer could see both brands at once. I said, "Lena Price is coming to meet me." Dad looked toward the loading door. "Your mother believes the buyer will be more interested in a broader retail concept." When I asked whether Mom had contacted Lena, he did not answer. "I am asking because you are standing inside a wall built to hide my name," I said. For 1 second, he looked ashamed. Then he returned to the practical details. He said the rear section still had enough room for a working display. He had added lighting. Customers could move through Brooke's table and discover my process. "Discover me behind my own work." I said, "The committee did not build this wall. You did." I left the depot with one clear fact. My parents had already given Brooke the space I paid for. They had not done it in a heated argument. They had measured, cut, painted, and installed the decision. They kept telling me nothing was final. I drove back to the studio and closed the office door. Anger made me want to send one enormous message. I wrote 3 versions. In the first, I accused Mom of stealing. In the second, I listed every year Brooke had received credit for work I finished. In the third, I told the whole committee exactly what I thought of their leadership. I sent none of them. That restraint was not natural. It came from knowing my mother. She could turn an emotional paragraph against me. It became proof that I was unstable. Facts gave her less room. I opened the market agreement. The committee reserved the right to change booth locations for safety or traffic. It did not promise a specific pavilion. That meant Mom could defend the move as a layout decision. But the agreement also said every booth had to be operated under the accepted vendor's name. Products from unapproved vendors required written committee consent and clear maker attribution. Brooke had not been approved. I sent Calvin the depot photographs and my acceptance email. I also sent my payment receipt and the current map. I asked 3 questions. Calvin replied that evening. He said no vote had occurred. Brooke had not completed an application, and he had never seen the divided layout. I also emailed Lena Price. I did not want my first direct problem with a buyer to sound like family drama. I kept it short. The market map was changing without my agreement. So was the pavilion branding. I clarified that Hallie Mercer Studio had no production partnership with Brooke Mercer Home. It had no retail partnership either. I attached my original portfolio and asked Lena to confirm where she preferred to meet. An automatic reply arrived. Lena was traveling until the following week. That night, Mom came to my house. She did not knock. She used the key I had given my parents years earlier when I traveled for markets and needed someone to water plants. I heard the door open while I was washing glaze from my hands at the kitchen sink. She walked in carrying my brass sign. Mom unrolled a sample panel that read Brooke Mercer Home in raised cream letters, with ceramics by Hallie Mercer Studio in much smaller type beneath it. She placed the inventory list and a roll of blank labels beside it. "This gives you credit," she said. I told her, "It makes me a supplier to Brooke, and I am not her supplier." When I asked whether she had contacted Lena, she said, "I told her we were presenting a family collection." She turned. "You keep saying that as though it cannot change." Mom did not believe consent was a decision. She believed it was a delay between her plan and my surrender. I asked her to return my 6 samples. She said Brooke needed them through the market. No. Mom looked genuinely frustrated, as if I had refused to move a chair out of a doorway. She said Brooke had paid for photography and linens. She had also paid for packaging and advertising. The committee had promoted the launch. Vendors had been placed around the new layout. Pulling out now would damage everyone. She said, "We trusted you to come around." There are sentences that explain an entire family. I picked up the brass sign. I held it against my chest. "This stays with me," I said. "It has my name on it. That is why you covered it." Mom gathered the vinyl sample and moved toward the door. Before leaving, she said the committee could refund my fee if I chose not to participate. She was not offering to restore my booth. She was offering to buy my silence for the amount I had paid 9 months earlier. When I said I was still an accepted vendor, she replied, "Then act like part of the market." After she left, I changed the lock cylinder on my front door. Calvin called the next afternoon. The committee had held an emergency video meeting. Mom argued that the new layout increased traffic and created a featured family installation. Dad said construction was already complete. 2 members thought the concept sounded attractive, but had assumed I approved it. When Calvin told them I did not, the room changed. The committee ordered Mom to remove Brooke's branding from the accepted vendor space unless Brooke completed a late application, and I signed a written collaboration agreement. They also told her to restore my full pavilion or offer me an equivalent space. Mom sent the committee a message saying I had verbally agreed to a collaborative display. I told him exactly what I had agreed to. It was a 6-piece photo loan with credit and a return date. I forwarded the signed loan sheet. The sheet proved only that Brooke had borrowed 6 pieces. It did not prove why Mom changed the pavilion. It did not prove what she told Lena, but it proved I had treated the pieces as temporary loans, not shared inventory. Then I made another mistake. I asked the committee not to remove my mother from vendor relations before the market. Calvin had not suggested removal. Still, I could hear where the conversation was going. Mom had used the general inbox to answer her daughter's complaint and made an unapproved vendor central to the layout. Those were not small issues. I told myself I was preventing chaos 9 days before opening. In truth, I was still protecting her from the full result of her choices. Calvin agreed to let her finish logistics under another member's oversight. The committee restored my name on the official map and instructed Dad to remove the center wall. For one evening, I believed the problem was turning. The next morning, the market website announced a featured presentation called the Mercer Table. The description said sisters Brooke and Hallie Mercer would introduce a coordinated home collection blending local ceramics with modern styling. It named Brooke as creative director. It named me as production artist. Mom had scheduled the post before the emergency meeting. When the web volunteer received the committee's correction, she called me in confusion. The request said, "Please publish before vendor review is complete. The sisters are aligned." Hallie tends to get nervous when attention grows. We do not want her backing away from a valuable opportunity. That email was not proof of every lie. It was proof that my mother expected my objection and chose to publish first. Screenshots had already spread. Customers messaged me asking whether I was closing my studio to work for Brooke. A shop owner asked whether future invoices should go through the new brand. One of my wholesale accounts congratulated me on hiring a creative director. I spent the day correcting a partnership that had never existed. That was the first practical consequence. My parents had not merely hurt my feelings. They had confused the people who paid my business. I called Mom. She answered with, "The post is down. What else do you want?" When I asked her to send a public correction, she refused. She said it would create gossip and damage the market. Mom told me to stop using committee language against her. Facts sounded like disloyalty to her. That was especially true when they limited her control. Brooke did not answer my calls. I drove to Brooke's apartment. She opened the door in a branded apron and let me into a living room filled with boxes, candles, linens, and cream labels. All 6 ceramic pieces sat on a dining table. Photography lights stood above them. Each maker mark had been covered with a round felt pad. I removed one pad from the bottom of a bowl. My initials were underneath. Brooke folded her arms. Mom said the pads protect the table. They are over the marks. Both can be true. I asked her to pack the pieces. She stood between me and the table. She said, "If you take those, I have nothing to show. You have candles, linens, and boards. That is not a table collection." "Then you launched before you had a collection." Her face crumpled with anger. "Do you think I do not know that?" Brooke sat on the arm of the sofa. She said Mom had promised the ceramics were settled. She said the buyer wanted a unified collection, and Mom believed the market could position Brooke as the person who brought everything together. I asked whether Brooke had spoken to Lena. Brooke had joined a video call with Mom 3 weeks earlier. Lena had asked about wholesale capacity. Mom said the Mercer Studio could produce a limited holiday run under Brooke's direction. I asked what quantity they discussed. "How many?" 200 place settings. Brooke said Mom believed I could hire more help. "Did either of you ask me?" Mom said you always say no first. My no had been converted into a personality trait. It no longer described my answer. It described a flaw they expected to outweight. I picked up the padded crate from beside the table and began packing my pieces. Brooke grabbed the pitcher before I could reach it. She held it by the handle with both hands. "Please, just leave these through Saturday." "No, the buyer will see an empty table. That is the table you built." She said I was punishing her for trusting Mom. I told her she had seen my objections. She had read the return requests. She had covered my marks. Brooke looked at the felt pad in my hand. Then she said something I had not expected. "Do you know what that is like?" she asked. "Having everyone assume you cannot do anything without her." The difference was that Brooke had accepted Mom's rescue so often that she now mistook it for support. I had accepted Mom's demands so often that I mistook compliance for maturity. We were standing on opposite sides of the same system. I softened my voice, but not my answer. I said she could build a real curation business. She could contact makers and negotiate terms. She could pay deposits, credit designers, and learn delivery schedules. What she could not do was begin with my inventory and call the permission a detail. She finally placed it in the crate. The committee met again that night. This time, I did not protect Mom. Calvin asked me to join the first 15 minutes and explain the business impact. I described the false announcement and customer confusion. I also described the unapproved buyer call and the use of my photographs. I stayed with what I could show. Mom interrupted twice. First, she said Harbor Home had approached the market for fresh concepts, and she had acted quickly. Then she said families often share resources without formal paperwork. Calvin asked whether any other booth had been reassigned to a relative. He asked the same about portfolios and buyer meetings. Mom said that was different. No one asked her to explain how. The committee removed Mom from vendor communications effective immediately. Another member took over the inbox. They ordered Dad to restore the pavilion before setup and told Brooke she could not sell without approval. Dad resigned from the setup team during the call. 10 minutes later, Dad called. He said I had embarrassed Mom in front of people who had known her for 20 years. He said the market was her proudest work and that I could have handled it privately. Dad said, "You know she was trying to help." I said, "Help who?" Then he warned me that the pavilion might not be ready. By resigning, he was leaving the center wall in place. I said I would handle the wall. The next morning, I went to the depot with Tessa, a cordless drill, patching compound, paint, and the original layout measurements. Calvin met us there. The cream vinyl with Brooke's brand still covered the front panel. I peeled the vinyl away. It came off in one broad sheet and left a pale rectangle in the paint. Dad had built it well. Removing it without damaging the rented panels took most of the day. Calvin helped with the top braces. Tessa labeled every piece of hardware so it could be stored. I patched the holes and repainted the seams. Mom came to the depot at noon. She watched me unscrew the frame Dad had built. "You got what you wanted," she said. She said Brooke had canceled her website launch. She had lost the photography deposit and could not return some of the packaging. Dad had walked away from a committee he loved. I set the drill down. None of those things required my booth. Mom asked whether I felt good about breaking the family over plates. I said, "You plan to put her name over mine. Do not reduce that to plates." She told me I was always jealous of Brooke. The accusation was so old that it almost felt comfortable. For years, it had ended every argument. If I objected to giving something up, I was jealous. If I asked for equal treatment, I was keeping score. If I succeeded, I was making Brooke feel small. This time, the word did not control the room. I said I had offered Brooke honest credit. I had also given her a photo loan and advice. What I refused was disappearing. Mom replied, "Nobody asked you to disappear." We finished the pavilion near sunset. The pavilion was restored to its original size. The work had cost me a full production day. My shoulders ached. Clay waited under plastic at the studio. Orders still needed packing. Back at the studio, Tessa asked whether I still wanted to do the market. For months, I had treated participation as fixed. I had fought to keep the booth because it was mine. But the market now felt contaminated by every argument around it. That was my lowest point. Not because I feared losing, because I no longer knew whether reclaiming the space would feel like winning. Inside, the brass sign leaned against my desk. Then I opened Lena's email. Her automatic reply was gone. A new message had arrived while we worked. She thanked me for clarifying the business relationship. She said she had received conflicting information and wanted to keep our original appointment. She also said any wholesale discussion would be based only on work my studio designed and could realistically produce. Her last line was direct. "Please do not alter your presentation to match someone else's concept." But I was no longer doing it to prove my mother wrong. I was doing it because my work had earned the space before my family touched it. For the next 5 days, I focused on the collection. Tessa and I packed by form and color. We checked every maker mark. We photographed each crate before sealing it. I printed a simple sign explaining that every piece was designed and made in my Asheville studio. Calvin arranged for 2 volunteers to help with setup. He also sent a correction to the vendor list and the market mailing list. It stated that Hallie Mercer Studio remained the sole vendor in the corner pavilion and that a previously announced collaborative presentation had been posted in error. Brooke texted, "You got your public correction. Are you happy now?" Then I wrote, "I am relieved customers know who they are buying from." Setup morning was cold and clear. The depot doors stood open. The air smelled like sawdust, coffee, and the cinnamon nuts sold near the entrance. Vendors called greetings across half-built booths. Extension cords crossed the floor in bright taped lines. My pavilion looked whole again. The pale rectangle remained on the front panel where Brooke's vinyl had blocked the paint from fading. I could have covered it with fabric. I chose not to. I mounted the brass sign in the center of that lighter shape. The uneven letters caught the overhead light. Around noon, Brooke stopped at my booth. She was delivering a box of candles to an approved vendor who had agreed to sell them on consignment. "You left the mark," she said. "The paint will even out eventually." She touched the edge of a blue plate. "Mom says Harbor Home will not work with either of us now. Lena confirmed our meeting." Brooke's hand pulled back. She asked whether I had told Lena she was dishonest. I told her we were not partners. Same result. "No, Brooke, it is not." I asked why she covered my marks. That question had no version where Mom held her hand. Brooke whispered, "Because your name made mine look fake." I said, "Then build something that does not need mine hidden." She nodded once and walked away. The market was due to open at 10 the next morning. By 9:30, the depot hummed with final adjustments. Vendors wiped glass and straightened cards. They checked payment readers. I placed the last cream pitcher near the front corner and stepped back. The table looked like the plan I had taped above my bench in January. Blue plates rose against the pale wall, bowls nested on oak stands, linen softened the edges. The brass sign sat above all of it. At 9:45, my mother entered the depot. She was not wearing a committee badge. She wore a navy coat and carried a large cream shopping bag. Mom set a large cream shopping bag on my table. Inside were the raised letters for Brooke's brand. She said, "This can still be repaired before the doors open." That was when I understood the committee decision had changed nothing inside her. I lifted the bag and placed it on the floor outside my booth. "No." Mom leaned closer. She told me Lena had first heard about the market through the family presentation. She said the buyer expected a broader concept, no matter what her email said. She warned that I would freeze in the meeting and waste an opportunity Brooke could carry. "Let her stand with you," she said. "You can make, she can lead." "I can learn to speak for what I make," I said. The front doors opened. The first customers entered before she could answer. Customers came in small waves. Some had received the correction. Others had only seen the false announcement and asked where the rest of the family collection was. Each time, I gave the same answer. "This is Hallie Mercer Studio." Everything here was designed and made in my shop. Mom and Dad stayed near the coffee stand across the depot. They did not leave. Brooke arrived shortly after 11 and joined them. She wore a plain sweater. She carried her phone like she was waiting for instructions. At 11:20, Tessa nudged me and looked toward the entrance. A woman in a green coat had stopped beneath the market map. She carried a leather folder and studied the signs above each pavilion. I recognized Lena from her company profile. Before I could step around the table, Mom reached her. I could not hear the first words. I saw Mom smile, touch Lena's arm, and point toward my booth. Then she beckoned to Brooke. The three of them walked toward me together, with Dad behind them. My mouth went dry. Lena introduced herself and shook my hand. She said she was glad we had managed to connect after the confusing updates. I thanked her for coming. Mom stepped beside her. The confusion was simply a family disagreement about presentation. Lena looked at me, not Mom. Is that your understanding? No, Mom gave a small laugh. Hallie prefers very precise language. I prefer accurate language. People were browsing within earshot. I kept my voice conversational. I had spent days imagining a speech. In the real moment, simple sentences were stronger. Lena opened her folder. Inside was a printout of the original portfolio I had submitted. My blue dinner plates filled the top page. Beside them was the photograph Brooke had used on her mood board. Lena said she had received a second presentation from the market describing Brooke as creative director and me as the production partner. She wanted to confirm which structure existed. Mom said, the family intended to form a shared line. Hallie became uncomfortable with the pace. I said, there is no shared line. I did not authorize one. Lena asked whether any of the work had been designed by Brooke. I said no. Mom added that Brooke had selected the palette and table concept. I lifted one of the blue plates. I developed this glaze 2 years before Brooke announced her brand. I turned the plate over and showed the open circle maker mark. Then I reached beneath the counter and brought out the signed loan sheet. I did not wave it. I placed it beside the plate. This records the 6 pieces I lent Brooke for a credited photo shoot. It also records the return date. It is not a production agreement. I placed a printout of the original credited post beside it. This is what I approved. Then I placed the former website page beside that. This is what appeared later. The papers did not prove what anyone felt. They showed the sequence. Mom's cheeks reddened. You printed private family materials for a sales meeting? The website was public. Lena read the pages without comment. Brooke said the wording had moved too fast. She claimed she had planned to correct it after the launch. Lena asked who had proposed the holiday production quantity. I answered, I did not. Lena asked whether my studio could produce 200 place settings before the holidays. No, not without lowering the quality and abandoning existing orders. Mom said I was being overly cautious. Lena said realistic capacity was one reason my portfolio had interested her. Harbor Home wanted handmade work, not promises built on invisible labor. Mom said Brooke could coordinate outside production while I supplied the signature pieces. She called it a scalable family concept. Instead, I reached up and removed the brass sign from its hooks. I set the sign on the table between Lena and my mother. The place for this sign was covered with Brooke's brand before setup, I said. My booth was divided, and my name was moved behind a wall. I was given a list of inventory to relabel. That was not a proposal. It was a decision made without me. Lena asked, is that accurate? Mom did not answer directly. She said the display had been a draft intended to benefit both daughters. I picked up the cream shopping bag from the floor and removed one raised letter. I placed it beside my sign. She brought these back this morning. Brooke stared at the bag. You did, Mom said. I was trying to save the opportunity. For the first time, Brooke looked angry at her. You told me the committee wanted it restored. Mom's voice sharpened. The committee does not understand retail. Calvin had approached during the conversation. He stood at the edge of the pavilion with 2 other committee members. He said, we understood the instruction clearly. The public part of the confrontation did not begin because I raised my voice. It began because the people she had spoken for were finally in the same place. Calvin told Lena the committee had not approved a family collection. He confirmed that my vendor name had been changed without a vote and that the false announcement had been removed. Lena then asked Brooke whether she still considered herself the creative director of my ceramics. No, Hallie made them. I styled the photographs. Lena asked whether Brooke had permission to rename the pieces. Brooke looked at me. No, Brooke turned on her. Stop. Brooke removed her phone from her bag. She opened the product page. It was no longer public. She showed Lena the draft dashboard. The page was mine, she said. Mom pushed it, but I published it. Hallie asked me to take it down, I left it up. That admission did not make us close. It made the truth complete. Mom said Brooke was confused and emotional. Brooke laughed once without humor. That is what you say whenever one of us stops following the plan. Dad said, "Enough," and stepped between Mom and Brooke. There was no longer anything to contain. The decision had already changed hands. Lena said Harbor Home would not consider any Brooke Mercer home proposal that used my designs or production capacity. Then she asked whether I still wanted to discuss a small test order for Hallie Mercer Studio. Mom seemed certain I had arranged the whole scene to defeat her. Dad looked older than he had the week before. Brooke looked relieved and terrified. "Yes," I said, "but only at the quantity my studio can make well." Lena smiled. That is the answer I was hoping for. I rehung the brass sign. The meeting continued at the side of the pavilion. Lena asked about lead times and packaging. She also asked about glaze variation and replacement rates. My hands shook during the first few answers. I explained the wooden gauge beside my wheel and the drying boards. Then I explained how I sorted pieces after the first firing. I showed her a small variation between two bowls and why I considered both acceptable. I did not become Brooke. I spoke as myself, and the work gave me language. Lena proposed 60 dinner plates, 60 side plates, and 60 bowls. Delivery would happen in 2 stages. The order was large enough to matter and small enough to make honestly. I told her I needed to review my calendar before accepting. Lena nodded. "Please do." That pause mattered almost as much as the order. Nobody demanded an answer before I had measured the work. Brooke stayed after my parents left. She helped the other vendor restock her candles, then returned to my booth near closing. She did not ask for a place behind the table. She placed the cream apron in the shopping bag with the loose brand letters. "I am deleting the ceramic pages tonight," she said. I told her to send written corrections to the shops and press contacts she had approached. I asked her to include one sentence stating that Hallie Mercer Studio had never agreed to produce for Brooke Mercer Home. She said she would. Brooke looked at the brass sign. "I hated that everybody knew you had built something," she said. "I kept starting and you kept building." I said, "I would have helped you build your own thing." "I know," she said. "No, you knew I would help clean it up. That is different." Brooke sent the corrections the next morning. She copied me. They were brief and clear. She removed every photograph of my pottery and paid for the wax-stained mug after I invoiced her. Mom sent no correction. Instead, she emailed the committee a resignation letter blaming internal politics and a breakdown of trust. The committee accepted it. Dad did not return to set-up work. By Sunday afternoon, I had sold most of the Blue Ridge Supper collection. More important, customers knew who had made it. Some asked about the false announcement. I gave the same short answer and moved back to the work. There had been a branding error. It was corrected. Hallie Mercer Studio remained independent. On Monday, I reviewed the Harbor Home calendar with Tessa. We could complete the test order without delaying existing customers if we delivered half before Thanksgiving and half in early December. I signed the agreement under my studio name. The order did not make me rich. It paid for the remaining balance on my kiln and gave me enough confidence to lease the small front room beside my workshop. That room became my showroom the following spring. Dad called after 2 weeks. He said Mom was devastated and barely spoke about the market. He asked me to come for dinner and put the whole thing behind us. I asked whether Mom planned to apologize. He said she believed everyone had made mistakes. I asked whether he believed building the wall was a mistake. He said, "I should have made sure you agreed." I told him I would meet him for coffee, but I would not come to the house and pretend the conflict had been mutual confusion. Dad apologized for changing the pavilion and for pressuring me after the committee decision. He did not defend Mom that day. He also did not ask me to remove the new lock. Our relationship became smaller and more honest. Brooke and I did not become best friends. She kept selling candles through 2 local shops and began taking a bookkeeping course because she finally admitted she needed the part of business that came after the photographs. 3 months after the market, she asked whether I would review a maker agreement she had drafted for a woodworker. I told her to pay an attorney or use a professional template. Then I answered 2 practical questions about delivery schedules. That was the amount of help I could give without taking over. Mom mailed me a card in January. Inside, she wrote that she was sorry the market had become so painful and hoped time would remind me that family mattered more than recognition. I said family mattered enough to require consent and credit. It also required the truth. I said I was open to a relationship after a direct apology and a commitment not to use my business, home, or name without permission. She did not respond. When the showroom opened, I mounted the brass sign beside the front door. I could have polished away the adhesive shadow left by Brooke's vinyl. Owen, the metalworker, offered to refinish the whole piece. I asked him to leave it. The shadow is faint. Most customers never notice it. I do. It reminds me that erasure does not always arrive as hatred. Sometimes it arrives as a plan made by people who say they know what is best for you. Sometimes it arrives with matching labels, a family smile, and a place for you in the back. My name is still slightly uneven across the brass. It is fully visible. And every piece that leaves my studio carries the same open circle underneath, where no table setting can hide it. Would you have given the family one more chance before the market, or was the covered maker mark already the answer?